Whatever life holds in store for me, I will never forget these words. With great power comes great responsibility. This is my gift, my curse.
It's okay to give up. It's a noble goal to push on, sure. To keep going despite life, doing everything in its power to make you feel small, push you down, and revel in your failure. It's triumphant to have everything collapse around you, but still rise to the top, out of the rubble of what we call life. But what if we can't do it? What if despite all the times we rise, you eventually become tired of it, tired of upholding your responsibility? I know what I'm saying sounds pessimistic and kind of mean. It is, but it's a serious question, and it's a question Spider-Man 4 was looking to address. We all know the story by now regarding the narrative surrounding Spider-Man 4's development. Raimi could never get the film off the ground thanks to immense studio interference and unhappiness surrounding the film's script, a script that went through multiple revisions by several writers, and as a result has vastly different approaches to the story. Now, we don't know the entire narrative of Spider-Man 4. The script has never been released publicly, and only a few plot details have come out over the years, and some are questionable regarding their validity. Luckily, storyboard artist Jeffrey Henderson in the book Movies Go Forth, Fourth Films in Fantastic Franchises by Mark Edits, has provided new plot details that gives us our very best look at what the story would have been. Well, at least one of the stories. So in this video, I'd like to explore the narrative of Spider-Man 4 and figure out why Raimi was never happy with it. As we all know by now, Spider-Man 4 opens with a montage. It's a montage that shows Spider-Man beating up many C-list and D-list villains and quickly sending them to jail. This lineup of villains consists of the Shocker, Stiltman, Rhino, and most notably, Mysterio. This scene serves to show how the city is progressively becoming more dangerous as the escalation of Spider-Man's existence has caused more elaborate and powerful criminals to appear. However, it's also meant to show Peter's growing experience as he can quickly take down new villains with ease. A far cry from his early career, Peter is no longer apprehensive about being Spider-Man. He's completely lost himself in the persona, surrendering himself to it and letting it take over his life. In fact, he's become so obsessed with his hero persona that he's begun to neglect his personal life, which makes sense as compared to being Spider-Man, his life as Peter Parker could not be any more worse. For one thing, Peter has completely cut ties with Mary Jane Watson. It seems his life as Spider-Man has strained their relationship to a point of no return as she decides to leave him once and for all. It's heavily implied that MJ in the film would not have had any significant screen time. According to Jeffrey Henderson, Kristen Dunst was never a part of the film as her role was removed entirely. It's unknown if this had something to do with the studio, Raimi, or Dunst herself. But one thing was clear, MJ was no longer a part of the narrative, leading to their abrupt separation in the film. Not only has Peter lost the love of his life, but he also no longer has a home to return to. According to storyboards drawn by artist David Lowery, when Peter returns home, he gets evicted from his apartment. According to the notice posted on his door, the building has become condemned, so all residents now have to leave. Peter is forced to move out, no longer having a home he can return to. Worse yet, Aunt May in the story seems to have found a new love in the form of a younger boyfriend played by Bruce Campbell, at least according to Jeffrey Henderson. So who knows if he would have actually played him in the film. So Spider-Man 4 is a story that focuses on Peter entering a new stage of his life. His life as Spider-Man is excellent, and he's undoubtedly highly beloved by the people of New York. But his personal life is in shambles. He's lost his true love, his home, and even his closest family have moved on with their lives. Peter's practically looking for a new purpose in his life, and it remains to be seen how he obtains it. Spider-Man 4 is all about change, and the Daily Bugle goes through the greatest change in the film. Recently, the publication has been bought off by a major conglomerate who seeks to transform the company's business into something else. Physical newspaper publications are a dying breed in New York, and they aim to shift the company into a more TMZ-style business. The latest celebrity gossip, the stalking and harassment of various individuals, and the latest news that they totally did not acquire through shady means. This is the style of company that the Daily Bugle has been turned into. And to make sure they stick to their new business model, the conglomerate has sent over someone to watch over the company and act as their corporate mouthpiece to speak to the general public about the changes the company is going through. This character isn't given a name. While there are rumors that it was Felicia Hardy, Henderson states that her name was never definitively nailed down and that Felicia Hardy was never present in any script he read. It is likely that this character then was original and would have likely been played by Angelina Jolie. For the sake of this video, we will refer to this woman as Eve. Eve is an interesting character. Although she's here to spearhead a change in the Daily Bugle, she greatly loves and respects journalism. However, she also loves money, and while she's aware of the workers' disdain for her, there's nothing she can do about it. In the film, Eve develops a special connection with Peter Parker. Peter and Eve have a strange feeling of attraction towards one another. They feel a close attraction, likely because they both have secret lives that burden them. And it's that burden that allows them to understand each other on a deep level, even if they aren't aware of each other's secret. Eve's secret is her primary motivation in the film, and it's her connection to the Daily Bugle that grants her the tools necessary for her to fix the issues plaguing her for years. You see, Eve's father is currently in prison, framed for crimes he did not commit. At least, that's what she wants to believe, and she'll do everything in her power to prove his innocence and bring him freedom. The Vulture serves as the central antagonist of the film. According to Jeffrey Henderson, the Vulture was a black ops agent or mercenary known for being extremely violent and ruthless with his methods. He was so brutal that he'd leave nothing but bones behind when he killed someone, giving him the moniker of the Vulture. At the film's beginning, the Vulture would stand trial, accused of many of his crimes. Supposedly, his employers no longer had a use for him, and thus were now imprisoning him for his crimes. The Vulture would be imprisoned for what I presume would be the film's first act. Throughout the narrative, the Vulture's daughter, Eve, attempts to prove his innocence by determining if all those stories about him were true. We don't know much about what the Vulture would have done throughout the first act. But what we do know, he would have broken out of jail eventually and gained access to his Vulture suit. This prison break plotline is very similar to his original role in Spider-Man 3, where with the help of the Sandman, Vulture would have broken out of jail using his Vulture suit to take vengeance against Spider-Man. The Vulture's motivations in the film are pretty unknown, but perhaps he seeks to kill his employers that betrayed him in the end. However, there is a rumor that the Vulture wants to take over New York's criminal empire, but I'm not entirely sure of the source of this information. According to Sam Raimi and Henderson, the Vulture was the most deadly and dangerous criminal Spider-Man has ever faced. Spider-Man 4 in the beginning set up how Spider-Man was quickly dispatching different villains due to his experience. So Vulture was meant as a way to humble Spider-Man and teach him that he was not invincible, and perhaps remind him that his life as Spider-Man cannot be used as an escape from the pain and suffering of his personal life. The conflict of Spider-Man 4 revolves around Peter facing a new villain named the Vulture, a villain much stronger, faster, and more brutal than he's ever faced. He possesses abilities Spider-Man is not entirely used to yet, throwing him around like a rag doll. In their final confrontation, the villain teaches Spider-Man that he isn't invincible and needs to take his duty as Spider-Man seriously. The Vulture was also portrayed as pure evil, reveling in death and destruction. The Vulture uncovers Spider-Man's true identity by pulling off his mask. The Vulture does not actually know who Peter Parker is, unlike every other Spider-Man villain. The Vulture screams at Peter, blaming him for something that's happened. The villain stands over Spider-Man, ready to plunge his blade into him, ending his suffering with a maniacal look. And in the end, the Vulture's weapon ends up killing him, directly caused by Spider-Man's desperate attempt to survive. The Vulture flies away and crash lands near a harbor, bleeding to death. The unintentional death of the Vulture leads to the villain's child to misunderstand what happened. Eve, who was watching the whole fight go down, sees that Spider-Man was responsible for her father's death, and at the same time finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man as well. Supposedly, Eve would later find Vulture's body, and with his last breath, the Vulture tells her where his secret lair is. Eve finds Vulture's hidden lair, a giant complex filled with different gadgets. Here she discovers that all the stories about her father were true, but that doesn't matter now. She sees a new Vulture suit in the center of the complex. She puts it on, taking on the mantle of the Vulturess. She attacks Spider-Man, leading to their final confrontation. The two battle each other in what I'm guessing was a brutal fight, and in the end, the Vulturess comes out on top, likely because Peter refused to hurt her, traumatized by what happened with the Vulture. The Vulturess ends up killing Spider-Man in the final act, likely by flying him into the air and dropping him back down to New York City, much like this storyboard depicts. The Vulturess flies away, grieving over the death of her father and the one she deeply cared for. It's heavily implied the Vulturess ends up dying at the end, though it's not clear how. The Vulture and his daughter clearly mirror the Green Goblin and Harry Osborn's arc, but just condensed into one film. Narratively, I think the point of this parallel is to show Peter that tragedies like this will continue happening as long as he's Spider-Man and can never truly live a happy life. His life is in shambles, and even his role as Spider-Man leads to death and destruction, something that supposedly affects him deeply and directly leads to the ultimate climax of the film. At the end of the movie, we see New York throw a massive parade in Spider-Man's honor. News of his death has affected the citizens greatly, so they mourn his passing while celebrating all he's done for them. Within the crowd, there stands a man adorned with a high-collar shirt and a hat that obscures his face. It's Peter. He never died after his battle with the Vulturess, and it seems he's using his supposed death to escape his life as Spider-Man. He looks into the crowd, shocked by how many people loved him as Spider-Man. As he leaves, he hands a Spider-Man doll to a child, presumably fading into the crowd of adoring fans. Spider-Man 4 is about how the balance between Peter Parker's life and his life as Spider-Man can no longer sustain itself. His life as Spider-Man is at its best, sure, but at what cost? All his friends have left him. MJ has cut contact. He no longer has a home to return to, and his loved ones have moved on with finding new love. His new love now hates him and wishes for his death, and he seemingly caused the death of another man, just like Norman Osborn. It's all happening all over again. Every mistake, every decision he's lived to regret throughout the trilogy has played out like a record rewinding, but with new ticks and events beyond his control. Spider-Man 4 is about the dangers of repeating mistakes. It rejects the traditional notion that Peter can push through all his hardships and ultimately come out on top and fight another day. No, Peter cannot keep going. He cannot have his life constantly destroyed. Peter is alone for the first time in his life. The only solace he finds was being Spider-Man, and even that brings him trauma and unhappiness. He can no longer sacrifice his well-being for the sake of his responsibility, and gives up being Spider-Man. Sam Raimi's rationale behind this ending is that Peter had already given up his innocence, his security, family, and loved ones to pursue his responsibility and guilt. In the end, Peter was just a kid, and at least right now, he had to prioritize his well-being, unless he lost himself in misery forever. The movie ends with Peter seeing the impact and legacy he left on New York City and the lives he's changed for the better. Maybe one day, Spider-Man will return, but we don't know that for sure. All we know is that Peter can no longer handle the unbearable loneliness. He can no longer bear being responsible for the deaths of those he fights. And for now, he wants to live his own life, one unshackled by the burden of responsibility. Regarding what happens to Eve, the film reveals that she's still alive, taking inspiration from the film Darkman, where the film cryptically hints that the character was still alive. The same thing happens to Eve, as we see her disappear into a crowd, perhaps taking one last look at Peter before leaving her current life behind for good. This story may only represent one version of the script for Spider-Man 4. Even Jeffrey Henderson states that he's unsure which plot elements came from which version of the script. However, it's still fun and exciting to hear even an inkling of how Sam Raimi planned to end his series of Spider-Man films.
Oh, that's cool.
And that, and then the Spider-Verse thing, like when they did the Spider-Man 4, we had planned on ending it where Peter Parker, Spider-Man essentially dies, and Peter allows the public to have this great funeral so he can be free of it and finally have a life and like get married and have a normal life, because he can't. The whole thing is he can't ever find a balance between Spider-Man and being Peter Parker, and he's still a young guy.
The Dark Knight Rises ending.
Yeah,